Hi, hello and welcome back to MERAKI'S method. I know it's been a while since we've been here. I don't know if you caught the post I put up last week. It was done in a massive rush because I was scrambling to get myself sorted after Christmas. We were all very sick over Christmas, as you can probably still hear in my voice. Not 100% quite right just yet, but I think we're back. I'm hoping 2023 is going to be the year that we can get back to a proper schedule of posting videos and of doing streams and all that good stuff. So far we've had about 3 streams. We're due another one tomorrow, Thursday evening, if you can make it to that. The links are down below, and it's been absolutely amazing to be back. Last time on Rock And Roleplay we talked about different roleplay add-ons that I thought were very useful. Before that we talked about character class and race and different things that are part and parcel of character creation, and that's what we're going to continue on with today. And we're going to talk today about a character's background, which is another, I think, very key point when you're creating your character in the first place. But it doesn't have to be done at character creation. You can add to character background throughout their lives if it's like little small things that are not like absolutely hugely dramatic and changing everything. So let's get into it. Before we start, as always, I would like to post a disclaimer. First of all, I have already filmed this video once, so I'm hoping I remember everything I said, because I have notes, I have bullet points, and I work from those bullet points, but it's not exactly a script, so I kind of go off script, as it were, quite a lot. I filmed this whole video yesterday without turning my mic on, so I'm going to try and ad-lib and see how we go today, and I'm doing my best, so bear with me. And again, as always, I'm not a professional. I don't know if there is a degree in roleplay. If there is, I don't have one. I've just been doing it for a very long time. I'm just a passionate purveyor of the hobby, and I have some opinions and some thoughts on different parts that I'm going to share with you in the hopes that it's useful to you. Again, if it's not useful to you, if it's not how you roleplay, if it doesn't fit with your understanding or your enjoyment of the hobby, that's totally okay. That's totally okay. That's the beauty of roleplay. Everybody's different, everybody's story's different, everybody's character's different, everybody's games are different. So there's room in that for everyone to coexist. As long as we're doing it respectfully, that's all good. Alright, let's talk about character backgrounds. So what does a character background mean? What does that mean in terms of your character? Essentially, a background is everything that has happened before the point where you're starting to play them. So before the point where you're creating them in character creation screen or writing up your character creation sheet, their background is everything that has happened previously. From everything from where they were born, who they were born to where they grew up, who they grew up around, whether or not they enjoyed that, where they were educated, if they were educated at all, any training or jobs or anything like that they've had previous to where you're picking them up to play them. That's all included in their background. Now if you're playing a human, for example, that's probably going to be maybe 20-30 years. Not a very big span of time, totally manageable to work out what's going on in that time. If you're playing, however, something like an elf or a much longer lived race, that could be up to 2,000 years or more. It can be a little bit trickier to work out a detailed background for characters that are more long-lived. So don't stress yourself out about it. If you can just hit some major notes and some different key points, you don't need to know what they were doing every single week or even every single year of that time span. Especially for those longer lived races, it wouldn't be possible to do, and it's not important. It's not going to help. What's going to really make the character pop is going to be the way in which you do it and the detail that you've put into the things you have, not so much having every single thing lined out, if that makes sense. I hope it does. Okay, so the issue most people encounter, it's not even an issue, because this could be, you can do this and have a completely great character and roleplay completely fine without any issues at all. It's just when people think of a really great character, some of the issues that can get in the way of that are to do with background, are things like sticking to very stereotypical notes and very stereotypical, keeping your answers really basic. For example, where they were born, who their parents were, where they grew up, what they wanted to be, what they ended up being. That's generally like the 5 points that people will cover in their character backgrounds, and that's totally fine. That will help you create a character that is totally functional in roleplay. You'll be able to go into roleplay, you know where they've come from, You know where they're at, you know where they're going. So you'll be able to go into roleplay and roleplay that character totally fine. Don't get me wrong, not a problem. But they can feel a bit two-dimensional or a bit flat when it comes to their well-roundedness, which is one of those airy terms that's hard to define, but stick with me. The reason characters with those very basic undefined answers tend to come across as a bit two-dimensional is because it lacks connection. It lacks that connection between those points, those bullet pointed background, and that character where they are today. And it's that connection that makes the character seem more consistent, more complex, and more engaging. So that connection is what we're looking for. And the way we do that is we think about not only what happened in a little bit more depth, but also the effect that had. The effect that had on the character is the bit that's going to tie them together and wrap it into one big, deep, interesting bundle that people are going to want to get involved with and like work out and unravel. So to avoid those not even overused, I wouldn't even say overused, but to avoid those sort of common answers and common themes, to make your character stand out a little bit more, the best way I think is to just try and if you take a minute to think about different things and just think about the different ways, like all the different options that are on the table for how your character could have interacted with that event, you'll have a lot more options to choose from, and in thinking about them, you'll be able to say, oh, that one feels more like my character, and that one feels more interesting to me, or that one feels more like what he'd have done in that situation. So I think it's worth thinking about and just, extrapolating on them a little bit. For example, I play Blood Elves, as you well know by this point, so I'm going to use them as an example. At the start, after the fall, 90% of their population was wiped out. Obviously a massive, tragic event, so much so that almost every Blood Elf character today lost everyone that they know, basically their whole families, friends, everyone that they know in their communities, basically were all wiped out. Maybe one or two survivors, but essentially everyone any Blood Elf character knows died like 15-20 years ago, which is quite serious. And a lot of characters will have a lot of I think the most common way people have taken that is vengeance, because that feeds into the themes of the Blood Elf race. They've renamed themselves Children of the Blood in mourning of that event. They recolored all of their aesthetics in mourning of that event, and they created the Blood Knights to basically avenge those fallen civilians and things. So they're quite keen on the vengeance aspect of it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. Everybody mourns different ways, everybody grieves different ways. You could have a character that is coping through doing good. They're trying to inject as much good as they can into the world in whatever form that takes for them as a character. You could have a character that's trying to cope with that grief through very negative, self-destructive things like drugs or alcohol or anything else. You could have a character that's coping by signing up to the military, but maybe it's not actually because they want to join the military, it's just because they're looking for a distraction from those events and from that emotion they'd have to process if they were at home. Or perhaps they've taken it as a challenge, like, oh, I wasn't, good enough, or I wasn't in a position where I could stop that happening, so now I have to be better and I have to do X, Y, Z so that never happens again. There's lots of different ways a character can take the situation that happens. There's lots of different ways that can feed into a character and how it affected that character and what kind of choices it made them make going forward in their lives, which could be relevant when you pick up that character. And it's those kind of choices and that feedback loop that's going to make that character seem really deep and interesting and connected. So how do we go about doing that then? How do we create a background for our character that is in depth and thought out well enough, that gives them that level of intrigue in there when we pick them up to play them? The best way to do it is to first of all work out how old your character is, depending on the race. Now, you don't have to do it exactly. If you have one of those long-lived races and you're like, they're in like their middle age or whatever, just think roughly, broadly speaking, how long that would have been. Is it 100 years? Is it 30 years? Is it 1,000 years? Broadly speaking, how long that was. And then look up a source online, a wiki or any kind of canon lore source about the timeline of, good luck with Blizzard, about the timeline of what happened during that time, and pinpoint where you think, like, if your character might have been. Were they at any of those major events? Did any of those big historical events take place near where they were at that time? And how old were they when that was going on? So how then will that have affected their life? Even if your character was not near a big event, for example, say your character spent their entire life in Stormwind. Now, depending how long they've been in Stormwind, some big events happen there too, but that's neither here nor there. If your character spent their entire life in Stormwind, for example, and until the point where you pick them up, they have never left the city, that doesn't necessarily mean none of those events has affected them. And that's the kind of depth that's worth thinking about, because a lot of those conflicts and those wars will have been quite draining on resources. So even if your character was in the city and they weren't involved in any of those conflicts, was there a lot of conscription, recruitment? Was there drives to get people to sign up to the military to go and help those causes? Was there shortages of supplies? Was it food, water, materials? Was there any kind of rationing going on or anything like that? And did any of those kind of things affect your character in a way that then carries on to their adult life? Did that change their opinions on things, or did that colour their view on certain things, or etc.? Those kind of little things that not an awful lot of people have thought about when they come up in conversation will make your character seem really well developed and really well thought out and fleshed out. Another factor of having your character's background thought out is that you know how those situations, like we said, even whether they were there or not, how they affected your character, the kind of opinions and views they gave them, the kind of direction it may have sent them on in life. Perhaps they had quite a scary experience at one point. Maybe they developed a phobia, and that then plays into the character as you have them, and then you have to consider, well, are they going to tell people about it? Are they going to keep quiet about it? Are they going to give half-truths and half the story? Or how do they deal with that situation that happened way back in their background but may be relevant in their actual played time? So having thought of all these things as well gives you a stronger connection to the character. It makes you more aware of who they are as a person and how they react in certain situations, which will help you roleplay them more descriptively and engagingly, because they'll feel more real to both you and then in turn to everyone you're roleplaying with. And character development is always one of the key things that we look for in really good characters, is how they develop, that they don't stay static. They're not the same as the day they were rolled, especially characters that have been around for a while. They tend to change over time because the things that happen to them affect them, and that then changes them, and that character develops into something new, into something more or less than what they were when they were rolled. But that development doesn't all have to have happened in their story that starts when you roll them. They can have developed in their background as well, because all those phases of that person are, you know, still within their memories and still can play into different factors in their story going forward. Another benefit to having thought about your characters in terms of detailing out some different parts of their background and how that affected them, and where they were during them and what they were doing during those events, is that your character then has experiences. The byproduct of doing that is that your character has developed experiences, because when you start thinking about those things and where they were, then your character starts having memories, they start having experiences, they start having all those kind of things that then come up in conversations. Maybe they come up in events, certain things happen, your character's like, oh, I've been in a situation like this before, this is, you know, what we did at that time. It gives them a lot more fodder, it gives them a lot more personality, it gives them a lot more that they can bring to the table in terms of conversation. It makes the conversations a lot easier to keep going, which is another topic we're going to talk about a different time, because a lot of times in roleplay, especially with characters that are not just as deeply thought out, is that conversations can feel very static. They can be very factual, like, oh, this is happening, and then they kind of die out very quickly and they're not very engaging. So if your character comes to the table with this wealth of experience and memory and opinions on all these different things, they're going to have a lot more to talk about, and it's going to be a lot easier for you to engage in those conversations. Also, when you're able to see the line between what has happened to them, how that's affected them, and how they then act because of that effect, your character is going to come across a lot more deep and a lot more consistent, because they have that chain effect. You know, it makes sense. They're coherent from step one to step B. It makes sense why they're acting how they're acting, and that will then play into them as you're playing them in their actual role-played career. That will have an effect as well on how people see that, because they'll be able to pick up on those links, they'll be able to pick up on those consistencies and those what will eventually become character traits of that character, and they will all play together as part of their story, and it'll make that character seem very well rounded and well thought out. So once you've thought about how old your character is and what different world events have happened during their lifespan and that they know about, or were there for, or were affected by, the next thing to do is to start thinking of different parts of their existence, like where were they born, who were they born to, but take it a bit further to just to consider like the time and the place that was, like what was their day-to-day like when they were a child, what was their first memory, did they have childhood friends, did they not have childhood friends, was their home life growing up really nice or was it not, and if so, you know, why, and how did that affect them then carrying on from that. What was their education like? Were they educated by their parents? Were they educated at a school? Were they educated by like tribal or community elders? Were they not educated at all? Did they learn to read and write? Did they learn to read and write later in life? And if so, what inspired it then and who taught them? All those kind of things can play into what has created your character. Like maybe if they didn't learn to read and write when they were young and they only learn to read and write later in life, maybe they're still not certain about reading and writing. Maybe they get a bit nervous when they're having to, or they struggle maybe to read things or to read complicated words and things like that. All of those kind of things, or they're just not maybe confident in themselves. All of those kind of things play into that character and how they will act in different situations going forward. Now I have done up a list of little prompt questions that you can ask yourself about your character when you're trying to think about their background and trying to like piece together different elements of it. I'm not going to list them all here because my voice is just not up to it today, but I will put them into a document and I'll link it below and I'll put it into our Discord as well, so you can find it on either of those places if you're looking for it. If you feel like you need a little bit of help with just question prompts to try and get yourself, just like get your brain turning over these different elements that makes a character's background. And by all means, you don't have to answer them all. They won't all be relevant to certain characters anyway. Just read through them and pick out the ones that you feel really like catch your eye for your character and answer those. So, in summary, you're going to work out how old your character is, work out where roughly in the world it was that they were growing up, or if they were moving around. Look on the various resources online to find out a rough timeline of events that happened in your particular game of choice, and work out where your character was for those events and how those events played into their life or affected their life. And after that, once you have that those main story beats, flesh that out with little questions and prompts about first memories, childhood friends, education, all those little bits that come after that fill those gaps in, and that will create a very rounded, very holistic, very consistent character. And that's all created before you've even started role-playing the character. You know exactly who they are, and you know exactly why they're like that, and exactly how they react to different situations in the game world. And hopefully that will, make it a lot easier for you to jump into that character and roleplay them knowing exactly who they are, and it will also make them a lot more engaging and a lot more interesting to roleplay with, which will hopefully in turn help you generate a lot more roleplay for yourself. So I hope this has helped you. I hope you found it useful. If you have, let me know in the comments down below. If you haven't, let me know in the comments down below. If there's anything you think I have missed in terms of character background, let me know down below as well, because I always find these things super interesting. Like I say, I've just been doing this myself for a long time. I have opinions. I'm not an expert, so I'm hands up will admit I normally, I miss stuff all the time. That's just how it is, but we're all learning, and I'm quite happy to learn from you if you have something you think you can add as well. Next time we're going to be talking about my personal RP add-ons, because I know I went over a few of them in last week. I didn't go over all of them, however I used quite a few, so I'm going to go over my personal RP add-ons next time in 2 weeks. Next week is going to be a gold making one, so if that's your cup of tea, you can come back for that. If not, I'll see you in 2 weeks to talk about add-ons. If you want to catch up with us before then, you can always find us live on Twitch twice a week, Thursdays normally and a weekend night. And all our socials are linked below as well. So until then, friends, thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye!